Okay, so that first semifinal, really interesting match. You would be lying to yourself, I think, if you called it an epic. It went 5 sets, marquee names. In a way, obviously still lived up to the hype, but remember when I left off last video saying that we finally got a young guy rivalry that is gonna make us forget about all those struggle bus inter-next gen battles between all those 90s guys. Well, today really did harken back, especially for the first 3 sets. A good portion of this match actually did resemble something along the lines of when Stefanos and Zverev played in the semifinals 3 years ago. And, especially for those first 3 sets, I was like, man, this sucks. This is like one you probably file towards the back, maybe even at the bottom of Alcaraz and Sinner's 9 matches to this point. Obviously, you would be forgiven for thinking otherwise, just looking on the surface. Big names, 5 sets, over 4 hours. Pretty good 5th set at that. If you didn't know any better, those are all the ingredients for, an epic. And yeah, if you watched my preview, I did get the pick right, Alcaraz in 5. But there were a lot of things that I didn't foresee that were ever present in, shifting the tide, making this result what it was. A couple of things, one thing in particular that I did get pretty much on the money, but nonetheless, a very fascinating watch. It was one that, very quickly became less about, tactics employed and more who handled their nerves better. And of course, whose body was going to be more sturdy at the end, which proved to be Alcaraz by some distance in this match. But where do we start? Obviously, Jannik Sinner came out of the gates, guns blazing, probably played his best tennis, especially in that passage of play to get up an early 4-0 lead. He was pretty much flawless. He didn't put a foot wrong, and I don't think he really replicated that level of play, especially from the baseline, the rest of the match. Because, that was the one segment in this match where Sinner's absolute best from the baseline was present throughout. You had, some of the typical dynamics going on that we've seen in this rivalry, where if Alcaraz isn't executing, mixing up his heights, mixing up the spins, which I do think he tried to do early on, but he just wasn't really executing it all that well, and his forehand was just totally awry in that first set, missing a lot of these balls. A lot of, third balls or early in the rallies where his forehand was either being launched like miles out or into the bottom of the net. And I do feel like that is something that, I touched upon with Alcaraz, where I was sitting there thinking, outside of these big-time matches where he's playing favorable matchups like Medvedev, like Tsitsipas, when is the last time Carlos Alcaraz has really come out in one of these, huge matches, high-profile matches that pretty much will be key in making or breaking his tournament, and played with the lead and come out, starting quickly? Even some of, his best wins, like the Wimbledon final last year, he got blitzed early on. It was the 6-1 first set, and you think back, he started horrendously in Australia against Zverev. Not too bad against Medvedev in the US Open, but, obviously just outclutched in a breaker. Even in some of these best-of-3 matches, even Indian Wells, which he won the tournament this year, but he started poorly both in the semis and final. Of course, this, initially came under scrutiny, I think, of Alcaraz coming out tight in these big matches, being at Roland Garros last year in the semifinals, where, again, he was super antsy from the get-go. And you would think with this pattern sort of building up, and it continuing today, where he really was a no-show for most of the first 10 or so games, that this would be some sort of indictment on his performance in big matches, but that really hasn't been the case at all. You look at his record and you look at him, the eye test, watching him in these big matches. He's without a doubt a great big match player. And that kind of makes it all the more extraordinary that his record is so pristine in these, big time, big stage matches, despite playing from behind so much of the time. Like, genuinely in a match where, you could see him in danger and was on somewhat level footing, was probably his first slam, US Open 2022, in the quarters and final there against Sinner and then Ruud. And honestly, early doors in this match, it was comparable to how poorly he started against Zverev. It kind of felt like he could have gotten back in the first set there at 2-4, 40-15 when he got one of the breaks back. But literally from that point on, he just wasn't making Sinner play, just leaking unforced errors all over the place. And I genuinely think early on in the second set, even though I think Jannik held his first service game serving 2 double faults, I think Alcaraz was actually so poor in that stint from, 2-4, 40-15 to him going down 2-0 that, just the lack of balls Sinner was getting to hit might have, thrown off his rhythm a little bit, because as great as Jannik started, his level, after getting that early 4-0 lead, it was tailing off, and then once we got to the second set, it really just nosedived. Alcaraz kind of in a do-or-die spot at 0-2. That was the first time we really started seeing him go to the bag of tricks just to give Sinner a different look. Serve and volleyed a couple of times. Actually got away with not being in great position, I think, on the second time, but kind of just reaped the rewards of changing it up a little bit. Then, of course, got the clunker of a game from Sinner. And after that, I think you really started seeing Alcaraz play the way that a lot of us think he should in this matchup. The way that has conventionally favored him when he doesn't, try to go blow for blow with a guy that, as far as linear power and ball striking is concerned, is the best on tour. Most notably, of course, that point 2-all game point that Alcaraz won. Probably his best point of the match. Up to that point, of course, just a lot of great depth on these high loopy balls to avoid getting stuck in backhand jail on defense. First look he got at a forehand, it was crush and rush, and obviously you could see the tide shifting here. And all those dynamics, Sinner level drop and Alcaraz playing a little bit more sensibly, a bit more patiently, that played into a one-way traffic the rest of the way pretty much. And, truth be told, of course we're going to get into the one very key and blatant turning point here after Carlos got the break early in the third at 2-1 and 2-all. But honestly, Alcaraz could have broken in the very first game of the third as well. At 15:30 in that first game of the third, he had a look at a inside-in forehand where literally any type of inside-in forehand inside the court would have been a winner, because he had Sinner in a spot where, it was sort of a desperate lunge at a backhand just to barely keep it in play, and it kind of seemed like Jannik had given up on the point, but Alcaraz aimed for, too fine a target and ended up pulling it wide. But then, of course, 1-all, Alcaraz miracle short angle backhand pass to clinch a break at 1-all, and it seems like, there's some daylight being created, and Carlos looks like he really can create some separation here. And yeah, in this particular passage of play, the next 2 games, you really got what I was describing in my preview, where Alcaraz can really drift in and out of being dialed in in these best of 5 matches. It happens against pretty much everybody, but most guys, he's so talented, he can still get away with it. He just quite simply has more game than, 99% of guys on tour. But these matches where it's on, even footing relatively, it has felt like at times him not being able to stay present all the time, which, probably does have a good bit to do with the amount of flair and just shot making that his game is reliant on, where you get this type of in-match streakiness. And I did talk about that in the preview. I talked about how, you expect Sinner to be steady all the way, and Alcaraz probably is going to have a couple of fluctuations within the match. And this one was a really costly one because it was pretty much self-sabotage from 2-1 and then especially 2-all, a double fault in the 2-1 game. But at least there, Jannik, all credit to him. Part of it was him, on the contrary, staying present, forcing the issue. Got the break back in a way that, you can't totally blame Alcaraz, but the 2-all game, obviously, this is the most prominent first instance where it seems like Jannik is beginning to hurt physically. He started shaking out the hand at this point, and for a while, his serve speeds, really suffered. And yeah, I've seen a lot of people, making the point, and it's a really good one, of Carlos, a year later being on the other side of the net, seeing his opponent cramp, and, kind of freezing in the face of that, not knowing how to deal with it. Because, Sinner came up with some really clutch spot serving to get himself out of trouble in that game. But Alcaraz here has 4 chances to break right back, with Jannik really struggling to get the same type of oomph on his serve. And, with 4 chances, it had to really sting, given that passage of play totally changed the complexion of this match, because it was really looking like this was one-way traffic. Alcaraz headed to a 4-set win, and a couple minutes later, it's Alcaraz back to spraying unforced errors and really getting 0 depth on his return. Jim Courier on the Tennis Channel cast a couple of times was just sort of dumbfounded with some of these returns and what Carlos was trying to accomplish, because they were dropping really, really short for Jannik to just kind of tee off on. And of course, you sort of take that as Alcaraz again tightening up, not really knowing what to do in the face of his opponent not being at 100%. And yeah, at that point, 2-1 for Sinner, you were really scratching your head, wondering how in the world did we get here, because it felt like total self-implosion, to be honest, for Alcaraz to sort of shoot his own momentum down. And that's another theme of this rivalry, right? Is that Sinner has been much more opportune with his chances. When he gets his chances, he's taken them with more regularity than vice versa, and this match did feel like it kind of bucked that trend, because even through 3 sets, Alcaraz, I think, was sitting somewhere near like 4 of 12 on breakpoint, 4 of 11, which isn't really the worst in the world. We've seen a lot worse from him and, other great players in high-profile matches, but it still felt like a real head-scratcher for how are you in this position down in the score at this point. Feels like, even in the 3rd set, he was the better player. And still, in the end, he kind of ended up losing the set convincingly. But, streakiness is a two-way street. As Alcaraz came down, going into the 4th, at least I was expecting another hot streak coming back around the corner. And yeah, this set, I think, is where the quality really started picking up again. On Sinner's side, I think he was far and away getting the most purchase out of his serve in this set, because up until Alcaraz broke at 4-5, Jannik was hardly dropping points on serve throughout the set. And to his credit, despite, on several occasions early on in the fourth set going down a love 15 where you thought that maybe there were a couple half chances there for the dam to completely break and Sinner to throw the knockout punch. But in spite of that, Alcaraz never really let it get to that point. In fact, I don't remember him even being taken a deuce throughout the fourth. He was also relatively unscathed throughout the fourth on serve. And I do think the fourth and the fifth really highlighted and put under a microscope a lot of the things that, we've come to expect from this rivalry really not being factors in this match. A lot of trends being bucked. We've come to expect Sinner to win the serve return dynamic. That wasn't the case. Sinner, really poor first serve day, and especially in the early part of the match, a lot of very untimely doubles. Obviously, we can speculate what was going on there with his cramps, but, with the way things shaped out, their serves, it felt like pretty much a draw, and through the back end of this match, big advantage Alcaraz serve, actually. And then, looking at baseline to baseline, as I said, after the initial punch was thrown in this match, it didn't feel like Sinner had his best stuff from the baseline the rest of the match. Some of that, you can attribute to an off day, off the ground. Some of that also, I think, I did underestimate maybe how drastic a change it would be with conditions to what these guys had played with throughout the tournament, with it being so muggy and a lot of the times being indoors. I think for both of them, this was probably the first day where you got typical Roland Garros clay court conditions, where it plays a little bit more slick and, you get more of a lively bounce and whatnot. But once Alcaraz got acclimated to that, I really think that helped him impose himself, both when he was going bombs away and also, maybe even more importantly, when he was playing with height, playing with width. And also I do want to touch on, contrary to I think in the past, backhand to backhand, Alcaraz was holding up tremendously in this match. This is something that, a lot of people have been touching on, where with this forearm injury, not being able to practice forehands for a while and only being able to hit backhands, maybe he got a little bit more confident in his backhand here, and, it certainly looked the case today. With the Sinner backhand, that's not really been a favorable exchange for anybody, but he more than held his own in that department. And yeah, talking about this fourth set, there's two really standout moments for me. Obviously, the shot of the match hit by Carlitos, 3-all, 30-15. I think this was a huge shot because you go from 30-all, where again, you give Sinner a half chance to throw the knockout punch, but instead he hits this absurd passing shot at the end of his range, well outside the tram lines, over the high part of the net, and it's just hammered. It's a bazooka up the line. And that's a shot, where Sinner had him on the defense to the point where you're probably being like, what a get if he just hits like a squash shot or desperation lob. And instead, he hits, this miracle winner. I think that was huge in obviously making it the difference between 40-15 and 30-all. But also, it got the crowd going. It was one of those shots that sort of electrified the crowd. Albeit, Sinner held to love the next game, but I do definitely think it ignited something in Carlos. It energized him. It energized the crowd. And yes, the second one is the gift at 30-15, that smash. But other than that, Alcaraz still in that game from 30 love down competed tremendously. That smash aside, he played 3 brilliant points to get back into that service game and ultimately end up breaking. And yeah, then the fifth set, as is often the case, less so about tennis and how you compose yourself and how ballsy you're willing to be. And if you know Carlos Alcaraz, obviously his motto is the brain, the heart, and the cojones. And he really does embody that with his game, regardless of whether everything's clicking or he's spraying. He's just going to keep letting it rip. He's completely unfazed. And I definitely did underestimate the fitness aspect with the difference in their injuries. And, Alcaraz, the forearm injury, that doesn't stop you from still working on your cardio, on your legs. He still had more than enough juice, and that was evident. Sinner, on the other hand, you could see way back in the third set itself the consequences of, unfortunately for him, the illness that, also impeded his clay court season, in addition to the hip injury where, everyone reported that he was in bed for a couple of weeks, not training, and obviously getting back to training just a couple of days ahead of the tournament. And you could tell he wasn't physically where he typically would be. Jannik Sinner, he should be proud of his effort today, because I've made it very clear he didn't have his A game for much of this match after the first set. He just kind of hung in there on guile, on the back of his elite returning as well. But other than that, for the better part of the last 4 sets, he was being outplayed. And 4th and 5th sets, Carlos Alcaraz didn't allow a path back for him. A lot of it really on the back of his own delivery. A lot has been made this tournament about a little bit of a tweak in his serve motion, and it's great to see that paying dividends for him. You can see it, his take back seems quite a bit more rounded than it used to be prior, and that definitely helped him. He got a lot of cheap points when it mattered, particularly in the last game of the match, and yeah, he stayed fearless till the very end. And for him in the last 2 sets, staying fearless paid off, because these big cuts, for the most part, they were all hitting their mark. I think Sinner did really well to make it tough on him those last couple of games and really make him earn it to stay within the one break and ask the questions that were needed in the last couple Alcaraz service games. If you're Jannik Sinner, I really don't think there's anything to complain about. You didn't have your best stuff today, and you fought as well as you could. For him, it's just going to be about heading into grass season. He knows this. Just building the fitness back to optimal levels. I'm sure the A game will return on a more consistent basis as well with more time. That alone, he will be amongst the topmost contenders at Wimbledon. Overall, I think definitely a tournament you can be happy about, especially given his bad luck at this event since he broke through in 2020, making that quarterfinal run. All things considered, the level he had access to today and the circumstances with his clay court season, I think you'd take this result any day of the week. But as has been the case, in this infancy stage of Carlos Alcaraz's career, these moments, when the chips are down and really everything is on the line, the truly biggest moments, he has been money. To date, I think you can only really come up with 2 examples of him being really out-clutched. For one, he was an 18-year-old, lost in a super breaker, 2 sets down to Matteo Berrettini at the Australian Open in 2022. The other is one where he had championship point against Djokovic in Cincinnati last year, and that came down to the absolute wire. It really is wild to see, because there's a pattern there where Alcaraz, a lot of the times, it feels like he's kind of digging his own grave. You can go as far as to say imploding at times in the middle of these matches to make things so much more difficult on himself. But when the time comes to step up to the plate and deliver with everything on the line, it's like Max Kellerman said, the Martians have the death beam pointed at Earth. You gotta hit the shot. Carlos Alcaraz, he thrives in those situations. He is automatic, and that's what gets him over the hump today. Massive props for never getting rattled, staying the course, even after flirting with disaster there for a little bit. But certainly this is one that you would say he needed more. He's still trying to, sort of get his season off the ground after all the injury issues he's endured throughout this year already. And obviously no better way to do that than securing another Grand Slam under your belt. So this is a huge step in the right direction in making that final goal a realization. And in doing so, winning today, of course, another brilliant record to add to the list of accolades in his young career of becoming the youngest guy to make finals on all three surfaces at the Slams. And remarkably enough, he has put himself in position on Sunday to potentially be 3 of 4 legs down of the career Grand Slam at barely over 21 years of age. And of course, for that final, it should be a good one. I pretty much can assure you that Zverev will make him earn it, will make him work for it. I'll probably get a preview out for that match tomorrow, but otherwise that'll do it for this video. Thank you so much for watching if you made it this far. I hope that you enjoyed. If you did, it would be much appreciated if you could drop a like, help this video perform better in YouTube's algorithm, and also subscribe to the channel if you're not already. Thank you all again so much for watching, and of course, I will see you all in the next one.